Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley coming at you with a Sunday edition of this podcast. Once more, sans my co-host Adam Frommel. I am, however, pleased and excited to be joined by one of my coworkers to talk about the Philadelphia 76ers, Bryan Toporek. He is a quality editor for Bleacher Report, which is also where I work full-time. He's the co-host of the NBA podcast. Follow them on Twitter at the NBA Pod. And he also covers the Sixers and the NBA at large for Forbes Sports and Fansided. Follow Bryan on Twitter at B Toporek. That's at BTOPOREK. We have a great conversation about the Sixers. We probably talk a little bit about Ben Simmons, believe it or not. Before we get started, though, just my usual housekeeping notes, and please continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to us wherever you get your podcasts. I say that with pretty pleases and sugar and whatever else on top. That is the best way to help us out. Really helps us slingshot up the chart rankings. Whether you use iTunes or not, we do ask that you head over there. If you have access to it, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us a 5-star rating, write a review. Those help us in the charts as well. If this is your first time listening to Hardwood Knocks, consider throwing us that permanent subscription. We are pleasantly sub-mediocre, as I reiterate on the intro of every podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Hardwood Knocks, spelled like it sounds. Follow us on Instagram at Hardwood_Knocks. And you can also follow our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks. We will be the first thing that comes up. All right, without further delay, let's get into talking Philadelphia 76ers basketball and Ben Simmons trade saga, whatever you want to call it, with Bryan Toporek. Bryan, thank you so much for coming back on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. And unlike Ben Simmons, thank you for showing up. It's really appreciated and super convenient. This podcast will be better for it. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Are you trying out for a Philadelphia newscaster job right now? Because you're really nailing it.
Look, I'm sympathetic to Ben Simmons' situation in a lot of ways, but the thing that people struggle with here, and if anyone's surprised, we're going to begin the podcast talking about Ben Simmons. We need to be able to juggle multiple truths, and like Ben Simmons and Rich Paul, like they're not blameless in this scenario, and it's become like, I don't want to shit all over players because I've become very cognizant of like, imagine they're checking Twitter, the mental health aspect of it. But he and Rich Paul and just his camp, they're not doing themselves any favors at this point. And I have to throw it to you, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what are your thoughts on general, and for the larger picture?
Yeah.
What is are there implications for the league here long term, given what Ben Simmons is doing? For anyone who doesn't know, and I don't know how you wouldn't, and are listening to this podcast, Ben Simmons has 4 years, $147 million left on his contract, has refused to report to Philly's training camp. They have been trying to trade him. They tried to trade him for James Harden. I get we're dealing with people and feelings are involved, but this is just like, I don't know who looks good coming out of this right now. My answer would be no one, but I'm just curious I'm curious to know how you feel about this. Just anything, any thoughts you have on it.
Exhausted, I think, is the only word. Like I had a newborn at home a couple months ago, and I was less tired then than I am now of the Ben Simmons situation. I think you're right, though. Like no one looks good coming out of this. I don't blame Ben Simmons for wanting out for a multitude of reasons. Like the fit questions with him and Embiid have existed for years. I know that came up in a couple of recent reports. I think it was Sam Amick of The Athletic, Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, said that was one of the many reasons he cited for wanting out. He thinks he can be maximized elsewhere. And frankly, I agree. Like you were never going to get a fully maximized Ben Simmons alongside Joel Embiid and vice versa. They papered over it during the regular season. It became an issue in the playoffs. I will say this, though. He has to take some accountability for the fit issues. Like, if he had made the improvements to his offensive game that Joel Embiid has over the past few years, then the fit issues would not be as glaring as they are right now. Embiid has improved as a three-point shooter, really improved as a passer, still turnover prone, especially when it gets double teamed, but tightened up his dribble a little bit. And the revolution last year was that he just started facing up more instead of being like a more back to the basket guy. So if someone came in, double teamed him for the weak side, you could see it. He had a line of vision that he didn't otherwise have. Ben Simmons, I don't want to say he hasn't improved at all, because I think the conversation about him has gotten so poisoned at this point because of what happened in the Hawks series and the past few months since. He has improved in certain areas of the game, and not even just like, I don't care that he, like the shooting thing is just what it is at this point. You would love to see him develop it. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but like during the regular season, he was toying around with the hook shot that he really hadn't shown in years past. And I think it was Yaron Weitzman wrote a piece at 538 about it back in March. It was like, he's taking a higher volume of these than ever before. And like, maybe this is the counter for all of these playoff woes. And then he went back into his turtle shell in the playoffs. So, I don't blame him for wanting out, but I'm with you in that the way he and Rich Paul are handling this is, I think the perception is going to start shifting more toward like, haha, serves you right, Sixers, to like, oh, wow, F Ben Simmons. Like, screw this guy. The report from Kyle Neubeck of Philly Voice the other day, where it's like one of the things they cited was he went to a team that was too good.
That was my favorite. That's my favorite thing to come out of this, is that the Sixers were too good. That was my favorite thing.
My internet was out on Tuesday when that report came out. So someone texted that to me, and I honestly thought I had to like check that it was not from a fake account. Like, I thought that excerpt was just like someone made that up. But no, that's a real. And so like that I am less sympathetic toward. And the bigger picture question, I think, is really the big thing to focus on here. And when the news of his holdout came out, I wrote a piece at Forbes Sports about that, because like there's only so much you can say about the Sixers specific angle here, right? Like I don't think he ever plays another game for the Sixers. Okay. Or if he does, maybe he'll do what James Harden did and just like totally mail it in for 8 games, and they trade him in a month.
He should probably only play on the road if he's going to play for the Sixers.
Yeah, right. I don't think he ever plays another game in Philadelphia throughout his career. I will say that. Like, as a Sixer, but when he gets traded, he's going to come up with some injury every single time his team is. And I hope they have to play them in the playoffs, because I think that would be really funny. But yeah, I mean, like, if this works, what's to stop the next star from doing it? Like, if a guy with 4 years left on his contract can hold out and say, I'm never reporting again, you have to trade me, I'm willing to swallow all this money that you're going to find me. What's to stop Luka Doncic from doing that to the Mavericks next year if the Jason Kidd thing blows up and Kristaps doesn't get back to what he was? Or what's to stop Zion Williamson, who we're already hearing reports that he wants out of New Orleans? If he sees this work with Ben Simmons, he could sign his rookie max extension, and then he could demand out in a year. And so, like, there have been reports that teams around the league have been like silently cheering Philly on, because if this works, contracts effectively become meaningless. And especially for teams in small markets where, you win the number 1 pick, you think, okay, well, I've got this guy for at least 4 years. He's going to take a rookie max, so I've probably got him for 7 to 9 years. Yeah. If you don't have that, then like, how do you build a team? Like, how do you ever get out of, like the Lakers and the Nets and the Heat are going to be good for a while because they're marquee markets. But like, if you don't have the promise of, we get Zion Williamson, we've got him for a while. Like, if you only have him for 3 or 4 years, you got the number 1 pick for a reason. You're not going to have time to build a team around him before he wants out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I am just wondering if it's, the Zion stuff. I think you mentioned the extension and trying to force his way out after that. I think that would be the larger issue than people thinking he's going to sign his qualifying offer. Mm-hmm. I know the qualifying offers are getting up there, and I think his is going to end up being like 17 million or something like that. When someone does it, and I'm not counting Greg Monroe, like that Monroe,
right.
It also didn't pan out for him when you think about it. Well, like, he got paid it, but like, it didn't pan out for him really. I'll believe it that's going to happen when I see it. And I don't think that Zion is going to be the guy to do it, just because Zion's health has been all over the place. He's not going to be healthy to start this season. I'm just wondering if Ben Simmons' situation is a little bit more unique because this is a team that tried to trade him actively for James Harden, and then you knew they were going to shop him anyway. And you also kind of had, as correct as Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers have been, and maybe they haven't thrown him under the bus. I mean, Rivers doing the complete 180 after the game. I get it's right after the moment, that Hawks game, and that it's hard to answer questions like in those emotional times. But like that just felt like, as the coach, like he is the second most important player on your team in theory. So I'm just wondering, like, if that stuff isn't happening, if Joel Embiid doesn't say what he says after the game, if the relationship between them hasn't always been weird, does it maybe not get to the point? Because I do feel like that has to be part of this, which is why I understand where Simmons, like, forget about the on-court fit. I just don't think stuff, and this predates Daryl Morey. This is around the Sam Hinkie era, where it's like, did these young guys have too much agency behind the scenes? Were they not reined in enough, given the control? And like, it's also not Ben Simmons' fault that they chose like him over Jimmy Butler and didn't try to force that to make it work. Like, you then emboldened him too much in that. And so I'm just curious, like, if the organization had, I know people said the Sixers should have moved Ben Simmons earlier. Look, sure, but like, I think we've seen enough times, like, guys that are this good, they don't get moved on their rookie contracts. It's talked about, like the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander stuff leading up to the draft. No, these guys sign extensions, and then most of them are going to finish out like their extensions or get traded towards the end of it. So I'm just curious as to whether this really won't have the ripple effect that we think it does. But I do understand, like, even if it does have the ripple effect and you're dealing with, what are there, 20 to 25 players in the league that have that type of leverage, you don't want to see someone sign a rookie extension, then ask out, like what that does to parity and stuff like that. And then also, do we get to a point where that pool expands where like, you know, a top 35, top 50 player is still like a number 2 or a number 3. So like, we're going to give them that leverage. So I do see how it could get messy. I'm just wondering if this is like the extreme case because of everything that's just happened leading up to this point.
Right. And I mean, this is so weird because usually it's a guy on a bad team that wants out because he wants to go to a good team. This is like the Sixers were the number 1 seed last year. But we haven't seen a guy saying, I want to go to any other team. Like, I'm willing to go to Sacramento. I'm willing to go to Cleveland. I'm willing to go to Minnesota. Like, teams that have been in the lottery year after year after year. So I think in that respect, it is definitely an edge case. And I hear you. Like, I don't know that there will be a huge wave of disgruntled stars that want out just because it worked for Ben Simmons. But I think, you know, if the team owners in particular have to hedge against that. So I wonder, you know, we've got a new CBA coming up in a couple of years. Like, depending on how this plays out, I'm sure that is going to be a topic of conversation in those negotiations as well. And like, you know, do you put a restriction where if you sign this rookie max extension, you can't be traded for X number of years? And then do the players push back and say like, look, man, the way this system,
shorter contracts to begin with,
like this system is screwed up that if you draft me, you have my rights effectively for 9 years. If if you get the rookie max, so like limit rookie max or limit rookie extensions to 3 years instead of 5. So I think that's the thing to focus on long term, like outside of just Sixers specific, is, you know, what are the implications league wide? Does this come up in new CBA? Does this change the system itself such that we don't run into this problem again? Because I guarantee you, as much as some of the other owners in the league might be laughing at the Sixers now, they won't find it so funny when it's their team dealing with their star wanting out a couple years left.
And I'm sure and I think we talked about this on Twitter once, I'm sure there are teams that think they can benefit from these types of situations, even in maybe smaller markets. But you are right. Until it happens to them, that's when it's going to be a problem. And I would say, if you really wanted to take a stand against it, like there would need to be a tacit agreement that, hey, we're not trading for Ben Simmons then, because that helps set the precedent. I don't know how probable that would be. Looking at the actual Sixers situation now, though, and the reality of what this has become right now, if Ben Simmons never plays another game for them, if he doesn't have a functional way of removing the bad taste from people's mouths that they remember from that Hawks game, what would be, and we've seen Daryl Morey's asking price, assuming that's accurate. They are epic in how egregious they are. I think like he lowered his asking price to Portland for like CJ McCollum and then 3 firsts and 3 pick swaps or whatever that report was. What would be, you're the GM of the Sixers, what is the minimum type package or the baseline right now that you would accept for Ben Simmons, whether it's an example of a specific team or just like, you know, a theory of it, like, oh, we'll take a starting ball handler and we will take future picks because we'll hope that we can parlay those into maybe a bigger blockbuster trade later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough question, especially before the season starts, because I think at this point, you know, teams feel pretty good about their rosters, or at least like want to see how their off seasons play out. So I don't think we get to see it. Like, I think there's going to be a waiting period where, you know, the Sixers are going to want to see if other teams get off to a slow start. Like maybe the Blazers just totally fall flat on their face, and then Damian Lillard, like all the stuff that came out about him this offseason starts to bubble up again. Or maybe the Wizards, after their, you know, the offseason overhaul, they get off to a slow start. Bradley Beal doesn't sign the extension. So like obviously Dame and Beal are the top 2 guys that you would go after. You're never going to get either one of those in a 1-for-1 deal. You're going to have to give up Tyrese Maxey. You're going to have to give up picks as well. I don't think either one are realistic, honestly. Like, I don't think Dame's asking out until next summer at the earliest, and I don't think the Sixers can have this situation hanging over their heads the whole time. So I think what the return comes down to depends a lot on how they look in the early going, specifically how Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton look. Because without Ben, for as much as we focus on the shooting, the lack of shooting, and what he does to their half-court spacing, he is their best playmaker by far, especially in transition, and he is their best perimeter defender. So they are going to really miss him, especially in the regular season when teams aren't as locked in defensively and you can get out and transition more. Like Tyrese Maxey, they are trying to mold into this point guard that's not necessarily his game. And some of the quotes coming out from camp are like, we're really high on this kid, but he still needs to learn how to play point guard, which is not exactly what you want to hear 2 weeks before the start of the season. So I think, you know, if Maxey and Milton start the season off well and look like they can actually hold their own there, that widens the scope of the packages that you can get in return. I'm skeptical that those 2 guys could be the top 2 point guards on a championship team. So with a Simmons trade, I would target a primary ball handler in return. So like, you know, if you go to Indiana, you've got to get Malcolm Brogdon. You go to San Antonio is the team that I've had my eye on the most, probably, in terms of just like if there is one team where a 1-to-1 swap or like a 2-team deal makes sense, you know, a DeJounte Murray plus, you know, Devin Vassell, Thad Young for salary matching, like that is fine. You know, I think the Sixers are going to look like they lost the Simmons trade when it's all said and done. Like they are going to be giving up the best player in the deal because, again, I don't think they're getting Dame or I don't think they're getting Beal. But you have to live with that and just know, even if you are losing the best player, if you can get guys who fit better around Joel Embiid and make this team make more sense conceptually, it might be okay because you might be able to plug some of the holes with the guys that you bring in, or maybe, you know, Matisse Thybulle has a bigger role defensively with Ben Simmons out, or Tyrese Maxey takes on a bigger role. I will say, you know, I'm intrigued to see what happens with Maxey in the early going here, because they have been raving about this kid really ever since he was drafted. They say they love his work ethic. And they're going to look different until they trade Simmons. And, you know, whether that's a good or a bad thing, we'll find out soon. But, you know, if Maxey's not going to be the playmaker or defender that Ben Simmons is, but he is a better scorer. He's a more willing shooter. He can run pick and rolls. So we haven't really seen Joel Embiid run pick and rolls. We're going to actually get to see that this year. So I'm intrigued about the Simmons-less Sixers, but I'm skeptical that, you know, they can't let this linger for the full season. They are going to be worse without him. And Joel Embiid has said as much.
Now, how would you map out the ending to this? Do you expect him to report at some point? You've already said you think he's played his last game. So do you think he's traded? You know, when do you think he's traded? Is it just going to be in mid-December when teams have, then there are more players that can be included in packages? Could it linger closer to even the deadline? Is there even a chance that he still finishes the season on Philly's roster? Like, if you were to just map out how this is going to go, what do you think happens?
Yeah, I don't think there's a chance he finishes the season. I think he's got to be gone by the deadline. I think the bridges are too burned at this point based on all of the reporting. And I hear you on the Doc and Joel comments after Game 7, but at the same time, like, I was in a lot of the Sixers press conferences last year, and Doc just hyped this guy up every single time. And every time someone brought up the scoring, like, Doc was like, well, yeah, but focus on everything else that he brings to the table.
It was just such a 180 from that, though, which is what, like, you went from doing that to all of a sudden, like, I don't even know who this fucking guy is, basically.
But like, honestly, he was asked, it wasn't like, can he be a player on a championship team? Can he be a point guard? And it's a fair question because the guy doesn't shoot.
Right. It's just you go from being his biggest advocate to like not throwing him under the bus, but all of a sudden being brutally honest at a time when he probably scored more than he did during the regular season.
Right.
So it's just, I get that. Like, he wasn't wrong, but it was like, it was just so counterintuitive to the way that he had been carrying the Ben Simmons discourse to that point.
Yeah, it was not ideal. Not ideal. But no, I think it wouldn't surprise me if it goes until mid-December once, guys who signed as free agents can be traded, or even goes up until the trade deadline. But I'm honestly skeptical that they can wait that long, especially if Maxey and Milton struggle at the beginning of the season. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we saw, Jimmy Butler, when he was in Minnesota, got traded like 12 or 13 games into the season, I think. James Harden, I think he played 8 games last year before he got traded. So that's probably like around Thanksgiving would be my better guess. But because I just don't know which teams in the conversation now have guys who signed as free agents that the Sixers would want, unless there's a wild card out there. Like, maybe the Knicks are out there and say, like, we'll include Kemba Walker in mid-December if you can wait that long. Just throwing out a hypothetical. I don't think the Knicks would be interested in Ben, but there weren't that many guys who signed big money deals where it's like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. You would include that guy, and that's someone who the Sixers would be interested in. So I don't think they have to wait that long. But at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they're also just trying to shove it to Ben and Rich Paul a little bit and saying, like, all right, you want to hold out, we will keep finding you $360,000 or whatever the case may be. And like, I hope you're okay with giving up $5 million, because we don't really care about these first 10 regular season games. We think we can hold our own until then.
Well, and that would be the other element too, is that if they want to avoid setting a precedent, if that's the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, I get it. But you probably also want to see if you can, one, get off to a pretty good start, because that at least increases your leverage. And two, maybe hold out as long as possible just to see what happens to the trade market as the season soldiers on. Like, because there's always unforeseen players that are available. There are teams that are worse than expected. Players we didn't anticipate become available. I just don't know how long you have to hold out for that market to develop. I don't think it's going to be by Thanksgiving. I think you would have to gut it out until around like Christmas at the earliest. And that's just mind melting to think. That being said, maybe if you're just good, maybe if you're top 3 in the East, top 4 in the East still, perhaps that teams that are already interested in him, the Minnesotas, the Sacramentos, if Portland insofar as maybe that emboldens them to up their offer for Simmons. And that makes it easier to strike a deal at that point. This is just a very interesting game of chicken, I guess, of who's going to be able to wait out longer. So I personally don't think, like, I can't envision Ben, like, if the Sixers really drag this out, I can't envision Ben Simmons reporting in some form. Maybe he reports and then pretends he has an injury. He's not punting on $30+ million. I can't see it. I would be shocked. And so I'm just interested to see who caves first. But I do agree with you that in all probability, that the Sixers are going to look like they lost the Ben Simmons trade.
Yeah. And they have to be okay with that. I think one other point to, why it would make sense to wait is, if Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton are in these expanded roles, and if they look good in there, that might make them more appealing to trade partners as well. So if you are trying to get a Damian Lillard and Tyrese Maxey lights the world on fire in these first 10 games, and the Blazers get off to a slow start, maybe they're more interested. Tyrese Maxey is more like conceptual. We've seen like flashes of him, but we haven't seen consistent play out of him because he's barely got any run last year because he's a rookie under Doc Rivers. So, but like if the Sixers, other guys could boost their trade value as well, if they're going to be part of the package with Ben, that could help as well. But you're right. I mean, there's always some team is going to get off to a slow start and think like maybe Sacramento, just totally shits the bed in the first 10 or 15 games. And their stance of like, we're not trading De'Aaron Fox or Tyrese Halliburton. They're like, you know what? We're going absolutely nowhere with this core. Maybe we are willing to trade one of these guys.
Slow is just right if you're on vacation, a sloth, or describing QuickBooks. More like slow books. It sucks you in and slows you down with manual processes, integration difficulties, and glitchy delays that leave you scrambling for the numbers you need. Now is the time to make the switch to NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 financial system, because NetSuite gives you visibility and control of your financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. It's everything you need to grow, all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time, no matter how big your business grows. Failing to switch to NetSuite will leave you stuck trying to make sense of your books while your competitors sprint ahead. 93% of surveyed businesses increased visibility and control since switching to NetSuite. And right now, special financing is back. NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind financial program only for those ready to switch today. Head to netsuite.com/bluewire right now. Get special financing at netsuite.com/bluewire. One more time, netsuite.com/bluewire.
No team can afford to overpay for talent. Build a championship team with Indeed the smart way by only paying for quality candidates that meet your must-have requirements. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/bluewire. When hiring gets hard, you need Indeed, the job site that makes hiring incredibly simple. Just attract, interview, and hire. In fact, with Indeed, you can do all of your hiring in one place, even interviewing. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/bluewire. Indeed knows how important it is to make the most of your recruiting hours and dollars. With Indeed, you can save time and money by setting your must-have qualifications and only paying for the quality candidates that meet them. Indeed.com/bluewire. Offer valid through October 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's talk actual basketball.
Please.
How does Ben Simmons, I know he's still related to this, how does his absence, or will it change the context of Embiid's role at all, whether it's what he's actually doing on the court, or is this, if let's just say Ben Simmons isn't traded, he's not with the team, are we still, or are they still being ultra cautious with Embiid? Do we see him set a career high minutes per game? Do we maybe see him miss fewer than 20 games for basically the first time ever? There's just so many trickle down implications of Ben Simmons being on your roster, but not with your team.
Right. Because, again, Joel said it. We are going to be worse without him. And we saw, the first preseason game when they didn't have Tobias and Joel, and obviously Ben, they just got their brains beaten in. Tobias and Joe came back and they actually looked like a competent basketball team against Toronto. But yeah, I think even more of the offense is going to flow through Joel. And I'm sure, unlike Ben, Joe comes back every year and actually does show signs of improvement. So I'm excited to see, what he really worked on this summer. It sounds like he worked a lot on threes. He was talking about taking a higher volume of threes himself.
From the logo, off the dribble?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Maybe that's the solution. We just get point Joe instead of point Ben. No, but I think we'll see improved spacing. Where they're going to be worse defensively without Ben. So I think how Doc juggles his rotations, how much time he can get for Thybulle in particular. He averaged like 20 minutes per game last year. I think it's going to got to be closer to like 25 to 30 this year, just because he is going to be that. I love Danny Green, but Danny Green is not a lockdown wing defender anymore. He's more of a.
The thing that bothered me is people saying Danny Green was washed because he couldn't shut down Trae Young. In the first year. And I was like, that is the standard for whether you're a good defender or not.
Yeah, like your coach made a really dumb decision to put you on, like that was never going to work, and he knew that, but just decided to do it for some reason. Like that was, he set Danny Green up to fail. And I will say, like, I think if Danny Green doesn't get hurt in that series, the Sixers probably win that series. Like it's a very underrated aspect of what happened given Ben's obvious shortcomings. But like Danny Green went down in game 3, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the wheels fell off after that. He is like a really quietly important part of this team. So how you balance minutes between him and Matisse will be interesting. You know, Matisse, the reports out of camp have been really positive for him. It sounds like the Olympics experience was great for him. They're saying he just came in a lot more confident. And I think he will be, you know, it's going to be easier to find minutes for him because you don't have to juggle. Like last year, it was like, how do you play Ben and Matisse and Dwight on the floor at the same time? Because the spacing is just so bad. Well, now if you don't have to have the Ben question of like, how do we play one non-shooter? You know, like Drummond is still going to be a non-shooter, but like I think there are going to be more minutes for Matisse because they aren't going to have as many non-shooters on the floor. So that will be interesting. And then it seems like they're just putting a heavier emphasis on firing up threes. Like they are telling Seth Curry, you are too good of a shooter to only be taking 5 or 6 threes per game. Like you got to be like your brother, take 8 to 10 per game. Tobias Harris, you're a 40% 3-point shooter. You can't take 3 threes a game. Like fire 6, fire 7. So I think we see a higher volume of threes, which welcome to the 21st century, Doc. I'm glad you finally arrived.
That's also probably a way, the quality of looks matters, of course, but that's also a way of offsetting, okay, we don't have Simmons' playmaking. So if you increase the variance in your shot profile where the 3-pointers are worth more than 2-pointers, and then also now you have to plan around a worse defense, I would assume. And that's, you kind of already touched on the 2 things I was going to ask about is, what does their defense look like without it? It was bad during the minutes with Joel Embiid last year. I do think opponents were pretty lucky. They shot like 38+% from 3 during those minutes. Mm-hmm. And so if you're playing Thybulle more, like that should be fine. But what do you make of their defense without Ben Simmons? Is this just, you already mentioned Matisse. Is he someone who's, you know, you mentioned like 25 minutes a game. If you want to have I feel like he needs to play at least 30. And then 2, with him specifically, do you see any other element of his game on offense, or is it just he needs to knock down threes? He's never going to be someone who puts the ball on the floor, or that they try and run different type of things for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 3-point shooting is going to be the biggest swing skill for him. Like if he can't ever be a reliable catch and shoot guy, you're going to leave him wide open and he's going to screw up the spacing elsewhere. You know, I don't think they're going to run too many like Matisse create off the dribble, but he can do it. I mean, he has done it before. He's good in transition in particular. So like, I don't think they're going to run a ton of plays for him, but maybe they could use him as like a backdoor cutter and get him looks close to the basket or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think the defense is going to be worse. And I was talking with Ben Dowsett, who's a Utah guy, the other day about like, you know, DPOY odds. We were talking about this on our pod, and like, can anyone challenge Rudy Gobert? And he was saying he would actually put money on Joel Embiid right now. And I was thinking like, whoa, I actually go with the complete opposite route. Like, I think their defense is going to take such a hit without Ben that, you know, it's just not going to be a top 5 defense. So I don't think Joe is going to get that DPOY hype. But maybe by removing Ben, if they do maintain a top 5 defense or anything close to it, or like maybe Joel does feel more responsibility on that end because he doesn't have a safety net in Ben, particularly when Matisse is off the floor. Like a Maxey Curry backcourt is going to get roasted defensively. It's going to make Joe have to cover a lot more mistakes than he did last year. So I do think they're going to be worse. I would not personally put money on Joel Embiid to win DPOY, but God bless you if you do.
He could sort of get the narrative nudge because you lost Ben Simmons if the defense is still. I honestly don't know if I expect them to have a top 10 defense, but it'd be the same thing with Anthony Davis. You trade away your 2 best perimeter defenders last year, basically. Well, LeBron, 2 of your 3 best perimeter defenders last year. Get back one of the worst perimeter defenders that you could possibly get at that price point in Russell Westbrook. And if you still have a top 10 defense, like that's going to help him. So I could see Embiid entering the conversation through that route. I know we talk about how bigs can impact defense more. With the Sixers specifically, I mean, you can make the case for the Lakers too, because Davis is always in and down the lineup, but like knowing he might miss a quarter of the season, knowing that he's never been someone that plays 36, 38 minutes a game, that's just a lot of time where you're not going to have Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons on the court. And that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. Like I think Andre Drummond on a min deal is a good value for the Sixers. Andre Drummond is not going to anchor a top 5 defense without Joe or Ben on the floor as well. So their bench in particular, it seems like it could be a defensive liability. It's one of many concerns for this team, and they're going to have to figure out again, like this could help shape what they're looking for in return in a Ben Simmons package. I will say point of attack defense has been an issue for them for a long time. Like these quick, speedy guards, Ben is really versatile and great defensively, can lock down all sorts of types of players. Like I haven't seen anyone do what he did to Luka Doncic. Like he is one of the best defenders on guys like Luka or James Harden, like those heliocentric, bigger guards who aren't going to necessarily beat you with their quickness off the dribble. The De'Aaron Fox types, the Colin Sexton types, like the Sixers have just bled points. Trae Young bled points against those types. So if Matisse could carve out a role there, again, it's just going to be like you're trading off certain things with Ben off the floor. But if these other guys can paper over some of the holes, it'll be different. I don't know if it's better or worse, but different.
When you look at their offseason independent of Ben Simmons, they were very limited in what they could spend.
Mm-hmm.
We wish that they would have been more aggressive in trying to acquire some more ball handling, because they have, George Niang and Andre Drummond. Like those aren't guys that help you do that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like they're just that confident in Maxey. Like that's what Daryl was saying. I think it was after the draft even. Yeah, I think that was the last time he spoke with reporters. He was like, he tried to bat away all Ben Simmons questions, acting like he was going to speak with reporters later in the summer and never did. But he was saying, the development of guys like Maxey can help shape what they're looking for in free agency. So I agree with you. Like it's obvious that ball handling, playmaking is a huge weakness on their roster right now. Like for as much of the focus in Boston is about that, Philly has the exact same concern. But it sounds like they're just that high on Maxey and Milton. We'll see. I'm skeptical that it's going to work out, but this is the time of year where everyone's best laid plans still sound good.
What's the biggest thing Maxey needs to improve upon for the Sixers to not be in dire need then of that secondary guy? Because I don't necessarily view him as like a lead point guard, but he was just a rookie last year. What I do value, and I know the efficiency wasn't there on threes, but like he's an every level scorer, which is a stark change from what Ben Simmons is.
Right, exactly. So I think that's going to be very different. Like their offense will look different because he is running it, because he is so much more of a scoring threat. He picked up, I know, like early in the season, he was really reliant on that floater, it works, it's effective, but it drove Doc crazy. And, as the season went on, he got more aggressive about driving, drawing fouls. He's a better free throw shooter than Ben Simmons as well, so that will help. But it sounds like, it sounds like the balance of scoring and playmaking is the thing that he needs to work on the most, because he is more wired to be that type of, like, if you even call him a point guard, like a score first point guard. So how do you balance those instincts with, you still have the MVP runner up on the floor. You still have a guy in Tobias Harris who, played at a fringe all-star level last year. You have great shooters in Green and Curry flanking you on the wings. Like you have to figure out ways to get those guys all involved while also hunting for your own shot. So I think, this, like, Tyrese Maxey is the one. If Rich Paul wants to play, it's unfair. Expectations are too early on it. Like that's the guy who I can actually hear it, because like he would typically go on a bad team and get some time to figure it out. But like now he's got to lead, the team that finished number 1 in the East, and he's got to be their starting point guard. That there are going to be a lot of expectations placed on him early in the season, and I worry that he will struggle in that role.
I think the Sixers did a really good job of streamlining Tobias Harris's offensive role last year.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see him just like maybe turn like that one Clipper season where I think it was him and before he got traded to the Sixers, or maybe it was even the season before that? Like, do we just see him maybe run like more pick and rolls now? Like, is that because like they don't have any other options? Is he someone that needs to sort of broaden his offensive horizons at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they aren't going to have Maxey bring the ball up the floor every time. They've said, like, if Seth catches the ball, if Tobias catches the ball, like, you bring the ball up the floor. So I think it is going to be a more egalitarian approach rather than just, Ben Simmons is going to be our primary playmaker. It wouldn't surprise me to see Tobias take on a larger role. I will say, one of the big focuses with him last season under Doc was quick decisions. He said that the year before the Al Horford, Josh Richardson debacle, like Tobias was just dribbling the air out of the ball. And that's what drove Doc nuts. So he said, like, look, you catch it and you either shoot or you pass, or like you know what you're doing before you even catch that ball. So I think that it's going to be hard for him to balance that with having to take on more of a playmaking role himself. But yeah, like I would frankly be surprised if anyone on the Sixers this year averaged even like 6 assists per game.
Wow.
Right? I mean, Maxey or Milton would be the best bet.
It has to be Maxey. I guess Milton too, but it would have to be Maxey, and that's going to represent quite the leap for him. So right. I think, you look at last year as a rookie, and it a 20.1 assist percentage per cleaning the glass while he was on the floor. That's fine for a rookie, but that's pretty low if you're the point guard. So
right.
How's that? And what happens with his turnovers if you're going to give him that type of usage too? Like, he was pretty low turnover, but his responsibility was just not through the roof. I finally get to ask you about their main offseason additions. Who is more impactful for this team, Georges Niang or Andre Drummond?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a different answer for the regular season or the playoffs. Like, I think Drummond, just by virtue of Embiid, you have to pencil him in to miss 20 games. And, for all of Drummond's faults, like, having a guy like him as your main backup is like, you can feel okay with Andre Drummond filling in as a starter for 20 games this year. Like, you're not going to just get blown off the floor, which has really been the Sixers' problem throughout the entire Joel Embiid era. It's like, they are so good with him on the court, and whenever he leaves, they just get annihilated. I think they have to structure their offense differently, and this is one area where, Doc's insistence on running like full bench units actually kind of makes sense, where it's like, the starters have their own Joel-centric offense, but then you don't want to run the same plays with Drummond that you do Joel. Like, you don't want Drummond to be posting up as much as Joel does, or facing up as much as Joel does.
No, you do not.
Right. So I think, having him as the insurance policy is the bigger asset during the regular season. But I think Niang's actually going to be, I mean, Doc called it like the silent pickup or something like that. It was talking specifically about, like, if they want to play small ball, they can do like him and Tobias on the floor at the same time. But like, both of these guys in theory are upgrades over, Niang from Mike Scott, who I love Mike Scott as a person.
And his emoji tattoos. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we'll always have, I ain't no bitch. We're going to love that era of the Sixers, but he couldn't hit a shot to save his life last year. Like, Niang is going to be, and Niang's got a quick trigger too. So he'll be a big upgrade there. And then
Niang could not hit a shot to save his life in the playoffs last year, though.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Joe Harris couldn't either. I'm gonna bank on positive regression there. And Drummond, I think once the playoffs come around, it's fair to wonder how effective he'll be. So I think if they do get into the playoffs, and if they go deeper into the playoffs, having just again more shooters around Embiid will be really, like, having Niang to come in for Tobias Harris whenever he's off the floor. Like, if you put just Niang with Curry and Green and Maxey or Milton, like, that's a ton of shooting on the floor. Korkmaz.
So that was part of my question was, so we should expect them to get a little bit, I'll call it weird, but let's say more innovative with the backup 5 rotation, just that even if they don't do it in games where Embiid actually plays, because you just go Embiid to Drummond and that's it. Mm-hmm. Like you said, there are going to be games Embiid misses. So, like, should we expect them to actually play like tangible minutes without a traditional big on the court? Measurable minutes, I should say. Excuse me.
I hope so, but someone asked Doc about this during camp, and he's like, "You don't think we've thought about that? But sometimes your roster just doesn't allow for it." And
wasn't it demanded at this point? Like, I get like,
you would think so, but like, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they go, more like Paul Reed or even Charles Bassey. Like, it wouldn't shock me if, Doc does not strike me as like a super innovative X's and O's type. I don't think that is the primary selling point for why you hire Doc Rivers as a coach. It's like more establish the culture and get guys to buy in. And, if you wanted the X's and O's guy, you would have gone for Tyronn Lue. So I would be very pleasantly surprised if we see some minutes with Niang at the 5 or Tobias at the 5. We saw very sparingly Ben at the 5 last year, and those minutes have never really worked out. So I think they're going to try to be as traditional as possible, but at least it won't be like Cleveland where we've got Lauri Markkanen playing the 3. Like, hopefully we don't see Tobias Harris playing the 3 ever.
If they're doing that, Doc Rivers probably needs to get fired, to be honest.
Yeah. yeah.
What is I'm looking at this roster. What is the over? Let's set the over under for this. You don't even know the category that's coming, but let's set the over under on this for 3 for the number of pick and rolls per game that Furkan Korkmaz runs.
Oh man.
I can tell you how many he ran last year per game. That helps. 1.6 per game.
Yeah.
I'm doubling his volume essentially. And I don't know if you saw his hype video.
I love his hype video. Yeah, he didn't expect that to go as viral as it did, but he said he watched it a lot of times. I'll go slightly under, but I do think Quirk, they re-signed him this year for a 3-year deal. Like, they actually want him around. And it's
talk about his trajectory with this team.
I know. It's so like 2 years ago, you think he's just gone, and then he like re-signs as an afterthought, and is really. Honestly, I think he deserves a lot of credit for his development. Like, he's gotten significantly better defensively. He's not like Matisse, but he's clearly learned from Matisse, and he says he's worked with Matisse a lot. Like, he has some of those like weak side blocks that that you just wouldn't expect a guy like him, where you just think of him as a shooter and nothing else. But he's like rounded out his game enough to the point where he's a playable rotation player.
An important one too.
Yeah, and he, Lord knows, he does not lack confidence in terms of shooting threes or running things off the dribble. So I'll go under, but only slightly.
So if I put it at 2.5, would you have gone over?
Oh, that feels about right. That feels about right.
So what do you think about the Jaden Springer pick? Any thoughts or early impressions on his game? I actually know very little about him, and then I'm just curious because maybe it is Doc is in charge. Right. But I'm just envisioning the Sixers being pure anarchy until there's a bench resolution. Is there a chance that he gets a crack at actual playing time for this team as a rookie?
I would be surprised. Never say never, but I would be surprised. It sounds like they viewed him more as a long-term investment. If Maxey or Milton totally fall flat on their face, maybe, but we haven't heard much about Springer at camp, which makes me think his acclimation is a bit slow. I think defensively is where he's going to make more of an impact early on. I think the offensive game is a little more raw, but again, if point of attack defense becomes a major issue with this team, especially with if Maxey or Milton are both getting roasted and like Matisse is in foul trouble, maybe that's when you just, as you said, you just got to throw stuff at the wall and see, like, all right, Jaden, go out and like try to just shut down Trae Young for 6 minutes until we get these guys, until the first half is over, we can play our normal guys again. So,
what was Maxey that bad on defense last year? I remember from the games that I watched, like I was like, this dude will compete when he's on the ball. Is it a thing where he just can't get around those ball screens that he's just going to get killed on them?
Yeah, he competes, and his defense got better throughout the year. Doc said early in the year he was the team's worst defender. And then as the year went on, he improved on that end. So I think he's made strides, but again, it's just like, I don't think he's stopping De'Aaron Fox or, like anyone of that caliber. I think he's going to struggle with.
Looking at this roster, who is the player maybe people aren't talking about enough, or just the player that you identified they're going to play a bigger, more important role on this Sixers squad this season than expected?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't know how much buzz Maxey is getting nationally. It doesn't seem like a lot, but he does seem like he's in line to be the starting point guard, so I can't choose him, but like he is kind of their main X factor this year. I'd say, like, if we're going deep cuts here, Isaiah Joe has really stood out in the preseason. That guy could just shoot the hell out of the ball. So if you're looking for, again, just like things aren't falling one night for Danny or for Seth Curry or for Korkmaz off the bench, it wouldn't shock me to see Isaiah Joe work his way into the rotation a little bit. And then Paul Reed's the other guy who he's just, I still don't know what he is. Like they are leaning toward using him as a 5. So, you know, it's probably like, as you mentioned, the nights where Embiid and Drummond are healthy, he's probably not getting much run. But on the nights where Embiid misses a game or Drummond misses a game, it wouldn't shock me to see Paul Reed as the main backup 5. And the kid's just like all energy at this point. Like he needs to put it together in terms of being like a reliable, you know, does he know defensive rotations in particular? But I know they're super high on him. He was the G League MVP last year, so we've always got that going for us. So I think Joe and Reed are probably the two, you know, deep cuts. But I think their top 10 is pretty clear. Like, you know, they got Maxey in the starting 5, and then going to be Milton, Korkmaz, Matisse, Niang, and Drummond off the bench. And then after that, you know, injuries might open the door for a Joe or a Reed or something like that. But I think they have a very clear rotation going into the year, even without Ben.
I'm wondering if, I don't think he fits the bill playing a bigger role, but as someone who could explode that maybe people aren't talking about because they feel like he's peaked, would be a Seth Curry, where it's just like he was averaging between like 4 and 5 off the dribble jumpers per game last season in the regular season and the playoffs. Does that number just shoot up? Are they having him run a ton of pick and rolls? Is that even what they're doing with their offense at this point without Ben Simmons? And is he someone just like, who would be the most random, not the most random, the most unlikely player that could average like 20 points a game this season to actually average 20 points a game? I might pick him. And so I'm just, again, I think people expect him to play a pretty important role. I'm just wondering if it becomes like more of a, holy crap, like this team is pretty Seth Curry centric at this point.
I mean, that's what they were in that Atlanta series. Like he was arguably their second or third best player. Like he averaged 19 points per game almost in the playoffs, shot, you know, almost 51 from 3, 58 from the field. Last year was weird for him because he got COVID and said it like did kind of knock him on his ass a little bit. So like,
because COVID is real.
Yeah.
Hashtag get vaccinated.
Supposedly, I don't know. I'll talk to Jonathan Isaac. We'll see.
We'll do our own research and get back to you guys.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the regular season, he got off to a really hot start and then got COVID, I think, in like early January. Just wasn't really himself even after he came back. And then finally, like, really got back into the swing of things by the end of the year. And his 3-point volume started going up from, you know, toward the end of the season in particular. But yeah, like I really do think they are just telling Seth Curry, like, you cannot end a night with fewer than like 6 to 8 threes. Like we just can't have, you are that good of a shooter. We need you to play that role, especially with Ben out. So, you know, averaging 20 points a game, I'd love to see it. I don't know if he gets that high, but like he averaged 12.5 last year. His career high is 12.8. I'm pretty sure he's setting a new career high this year.
I don't know. I'm gonna say like, what do you like? Is he at 18 this year? Like, is it just asinine to think that he could get that high when you're just looking at, and you're not really trying to replace Ben Simmons scoring, so maybe that's just a stupid thing to say. But I'm just envisioning him having the ball in his hands more.
Right.
So I have no idea, but fascinating player to watch. What is, aside from getting 100% of their players to report, what's this team's biggest weakness right now?
It's got to be playmaking, point guard, whatever. Is Ben Simmons a point guard? I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, I think, you know, that is for sure the biggest concern. You just, as much as we like the idea of this egalitarian offense, or of like, oh, maybe Tyrese Maxey really will be the answer here. going into the season, we just don't know.
Right.
So that's clearly what you would identify right now. I mean, again, maybe there's a pleasant surprise and these guys actually do pretty well. Like Shake has gotten off to a rough start in the preseason, and really struggled in that role last year off the bench. And that's kind of what led them to acquire George Hill at the trade deadline. So even if Maxey does well, maybe Shake struggled off the bench. They still have the problem of like, who are our playmakers right now? We don't really have a bunch.
The typical questions, we've reached the cookie cutter portion of the podcast where I ask these questions every look ahead. I would normally ask, who is the player as of now you think is most likely to be traded on this team? We've already tackled that. If there's a scenario where Ben Simmons isn't moved, or if they try to do something before they move him, is there another player you see as most likely to be traded, or maybe is this team even built to make a smaller scale trade when you look at the personnel that they have? Because every Ben Simmons deal, whether you're winning or losing, it's a mega blockbuster,
right?
Just inherently. But you look at this team's sort of payroll, and it's like, all right, you're not trading Embiid, you're not trading Tobias Harris, you really can't trade Seth Curry at this point. I guess they do have like some mid-end salaries, but I think you would argue some of their best trade chips, aside from picks and Ben Simmons, are like, Thybulle and Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton, who are all making packing peanuts at this point.
Right. Yeah. So that leads us to Danny Green would be, I guess, the most likely candidate. Like the only scenario where I could see it happening is if the season just goes totally off the rails. They,
tank for like a top 5 pick.
Yeah, right. Dave DeFore running the team that's going to offer that. No, but I could see, he's on a reasonable contract, a 2-year, $20 million deal. That's a value that any contender would want. So if they are just like, no, the Simmons thing totally ruined us, we are just going to take a step back. Like, let's trade Danny for someone who we think has higher upside long term. And, maybe like it could also be a vote of confidence in Matisse. Like if Matisse really takes a huge step forward and they need him in the starting lineup because they can't cover, like Danny isn't going to be that option defensively.
Right.
Is Danny Green happy coming off the bench for a team that doesn't have real championship aspirations? Is
there actually a scenario where they would punt on this season because of all this? Is it just Joel Embiid gets injured? Is that the only scenario where that happens?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think. I think if he's healthy, you just can't, because you don't know how long he's going to stay healthy. You can't risk punting on, especially with him coming off of the season that he just had. Like, I think you have to at least give it your all, as much as you possibly can. But again, like it always comes back to the Simmons situation. But like, this thing is going to be a circus until it's resolved. And how much of a distraction is it, like beyond just the on-court factors of like, can their playmaking survive? Can their defense survive? It's like, does Embiid just like mentally check out like he kind of did throughout parts of the 2019-20 season, that he just looked miserable out there. And if that's the case, like, does he take a step back in his play as well? So I think as long as he stays healthy, they don't fully punt, but it wouldn't surprise me if they take, like a realistic look at themselves before the trade deadline and say, if we have zero hope of contending for a championship this year, maybe we do try to flip Danny into a guy who's under a long-term contract, or like a young player who we believe could have a breakout in our system, whatever the case may be.
This is matchup dependent, but what do you think should be their most used crunch time lineup this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Seth, Danny, Tobias, and Joel are most likely going to be in there. The one caveat would be if Thybulle does become a more dependable three-point shooter, or if Danny's limitations defensively, like if they just absolutely need someone to be able to lock someone down. And again, Danny just isn't that guy anymore. I could see Thybulle replacing him. And then I think between Maxey and Milton, it's just which of these two guys is a more competent playmaker and a more reliable shooter.
What is a quirky, offbeat, unconventional lineup you would, just to see what happens, you would run out if you were the head coach or if you had the power over Doc Rivers to force him to experiment with?
Yeah, it would be a small ball lineup because I think we're not going to see it very often. So I would want Tobias and Niang out there. I would say Curry, Korkmaz, and then again one of Maxey or Milton, and they're going to get just boat race defensively. But can that lineup offensively make up and just pray that, like, it's not just a layup line to the rim? Maybe you just get into a 3-point shooting contest with the other team. I would bet on the 3-point shooting outgunning another team. It's just like, yeah, can you stop them at all from penetrating the paint? I would guess probably not.
Mine was similar. I just want to see 5 people who are like kind of ball handlers that can put the ball on the floor in a small lineup. So I'm taking Niang off, and I want Korkmaz, Tobias, Shake Milton, Seth Curry, and Tyrese Maxey. That's going to be a special nightmare defensively. But if Embiid's not on the court, I don't know what chance you could throw Matisse Thybulle in there if you don't care about.
Yeah,
if you, obviously for some defense, but I'm leaning into the skid until the Ben Simmons situation is resolved, and so I would absolutely try a lineup like that.
That's fair. Yeah, it would be fun if nothing else, and like that's all we've got right now, because otherwise the season is projecting to be pretty miserable.
Ultimately, and it's anything, every question I ask you about this is a little because of the situation.
Yeah.
How high are you on this team without Ben Simmons being there until he is if they don't move Ben Simmons, how high are you on this team?
Pretty low, honestly. Like I mean, Brooklyn and Milwaukee, regardless of whether Ben Simmons reports or not, are clearly ahead of the Sixers.
For sure.
I think I would put Atlanta at least on the same tier, if not ahead, even with Ben Simmons. Without, they're far ahead. I put Miami far ahead. I think the Knicks and Boston, I would put both of them ahead as well, probably. So we're talking like the ceiling of, I think they'd be a play-in team, honestly. I'd be very surprised if they made it, if they somehow finished with the top 6 record. And maybe Miami, especially with their depth issues, like if Jimmy or Bam or Kyle goes down, or like 2 of them goes down, maybe that sends them sinking. So I guess if other teams get ravaged by injuries, maybe they could be a top 6 seed. But I mean, I think for all of the focus on Simmons' weaknesses, especially in the playoffs, he is a very impactful regular season player. I think, he is the definition of when Draymond talks about like 82 game players versus 16 game players. Ben Simmons is an 82 game player. He's really effective in the regular season despite the shooting limitations.
The Sixers annihilated people with him and Joel Embiid on the court last year during the regular season. They straight up mutilated them.
Yeah, like I think a large part of it is because defenses aren't as locked in during the regular season. So you're going to get out into transition more, where Ben can be more effective and you can kick out for threes. Like they were just killer in that regard. Like Danny and Curry both just love the transition threes. Like in theory, we've seen the workout videos. Maybe one year Ben Simmons does come back and actually starts attempting jumpers. So that would be interesting as well. Like I think with Ben, I'd put them in that Atlanta, Miami, like competing for the number 3 seed unless Maxey, Curry, Tobias, Matisse, Embiid all have career years. Like 5-6 seed seems like their ceiling, and I think realistically they're probably in the play-in tournament.
This is a similarly loaded question, but if you're going to assume, like you are, that they're going to move Ben Simmons and get something for him, their over-under as we record this is 51.5. Actually higher than the Phoenix Suns, by the way.
Really?
50.5, which is
wow.
I know the West is the West, but that was shocking to me.
Yeah.
Are you taking the over or under? And maybe your answer doesn't change from this, but their place in the Eastern Conference, where do you see it falling? Just assuming they trade Ben Simmons for at least one player that's going to actually have an impact on their rotation. Is it higher than that 5 or 6 seed? Or if you're going from Ben Simmons to maybe it's a better fitting player, but it's a non-star, it's such a loaded question, because if that non-star is DeJounte Murray, because of what he gives you from the point of attack defensively, you actually probably could end up being like not better, but like you could end up just being better than what you're expecting in the 5 or 6 range. So I don't really know how to tackle that. So we could just leave it at the over-under. It's 51.5. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
I think because of the uncertainty with the timeline of when they trade Ben, or like if he even reports, or what they get back in return for him, like if someone like put a gun to my head and to my head and said you have to bet this, I'm betting the under just because of all of the potential issues that could stack up. Like I think a lot needs to go right for them to hit the over, whereas you could see the disaster playing out a lot more easily. So for that reason, I would go under. But I would also advise no one to bet. Just pick go over on Phoenix. That's much easier money. Don't waste your money betting on the Sixers this year, because there's not like we did these like Forbes preseason profiles for every team, and like best bet was one of the sections. I was like, there isn't really a good Sixers bet. Like I guess Tyrese Maxey for most improved player is what I had landed on, because otherwise like I have no confidence in any of the other Sixers bet. I guess betting the under would be the best bet.
I think smashing the under makes sense. Joel Embiid is so good.
Yeah.
That it's like I could see him being, if you left this roster alone, I could see the Sixers winning 52 games. But I think you also have to tell me that Joel Embiid then plays in 70, which he has never done before. Right. So I would smash the under.
Yeah.
Is there anything or anyone about this team that I have not asked you about that you think needs to be discussed?
Can we talk about Ben Simmons more? Have we covered him enough, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we have another 3 hours to go to obligatory Ben Simmons talk.
Good.
I feel like a lot of the coverage on the NBA now is anti-transaction, and I still really do enjoy the trade portion. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there is a human element to this. Mm-hmm. I have zero just like interest in this Ben Simmons shit anymore. And I don't know if you saw my tweet the other day. These breaking news.
Oh, with the
it's just the same. It's the same fucking thing, just recycled. It's not breaking anymore. Like you're just rehashing what we already know. I don't need the recap. I also don't even need like the latest leak coming out of Ben Simmons' camp of the Sixers. We've reached the Sixers were so good it ruined it. I need this to end. I want it as well as it can end for all parties involved. I don't even know what that looks like. I think the Spurs are my favorite for both sides. I think putting Ben Simmons in San Antonio, I'd be curious about the fit with some of the players on the roster. But if he gets to play for Pop, I'd like Ben Simmons there. I think they can give the Sixers an adequate return. If I care just about Ben Simmons in this, I really want to see him on Minnesota. I have no desire to see D'Angelo Russell in Philly. I know people think the CJ McCollum trade's a no-brainer. I actually think that you need to get a lot more stuff because of CJ's age and really just how crippling it will be for you defensively. And the other thing I will argue on that front is if I'm the Sixers and midseason in December, Ben Simmons is on the roster, and Portland throws you the kitchen sink outside of Dame and CJ McCollum, where it's Norm, where you have Larry Nance Jr., you have Rocco, and then just picks galore, that might intrigue me more than a close to straight up CJ for Ben Simmons trade is something that I've thought about. Because Norman Powell is a better defender than CJ, not the same level of shot creator, but still gives you don't want to be in your point guard, even if you can do some secondary pick and roll stuff, gives you some north-south juice there. That was something that I started ruminating over. I don't think it's the package the Sixers want, but I am curious if we're going to get to a point that it's uncharacteristic for the Spurs to trade for Ben Simmons when you really think about it. Mm-hmm. When you think about what they would need to give up, do they eventually try and straddle a line? And I think the two teams that stand out are Portland when Norman Powell's eligible to be traded because they have Nance, they have Rocco, and then just a bunch of future picks. And then I think this is a terrible fit, but just the Pacers have been mentioned. If Karis LeVert is healthy, if TJ Warren is healthy, those are apparently big, fat freaking ifs. And then you have Malcolm Brogdon just sitting there. So I wouldn't be crazy about that from the Pacers, but those seem like the two teams that might be willing to shake things up and then can provide the Sixers with that middle ground. And I get that CJ's the better player, especially, what he does in the playoffs is just, for most of his career, he's just been awesome there. Mm-hmm. If I'm the Sixers, though, I'd probably prefer the the hodgepodge deal that I just laid out. And I don't know if Portland would be interested in that either, but if you figure out a way to keep CJ and still get Ben Simmons, and then you have Dame, yes, I'm absolutely doing that.
Yeah, and then I mean, if Philly didn't want all of Nance and Covington, and they were saying, okay, we need a point guard somehow, like you can flip one of those guys, even for a backup at that point, like that would give you some flexibility.
You could flip Nance to Phoenix for probably campaign, Jalen Smith, and a pick or something.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Or even, I mean, hell, we'll see what happens. Well, I guess the Clippers wouldn't do that to Reggie Jackson. Yeah, I mean,
put him on a better team.
But like he is tight with Paul George, and like
he seems to love it there. I mean, I'm shocked he only had the 2-year deal that he signed.
Yeah, it just sounds like he would. I think Ramona Shelburne had the story during the playoffs just about like how he was like ready to give up on basketball, and then Paul George like talked him. So I think he's staying.
He said it afterwards too, that this team saved him. So but that's just. I think people will hear this and think that I'm fucking stupid, and maybe I am. And I think some people don't like the Norman Powell contract, but it's like, as someone who's sort of plug and play, and I know he's been all over the place for his career, if there's all that other stuff involved, I'm at the point where I might consider it. I think you would ideally want more of it. You want a star for Ben Simmons. I think personally, and we didn't really get into this, their best chance of flipping Ben Simmons for a star this season, I think is Bradley Beal. That's and I don't even know, like, does Bradley Beal want to stay there if he's traded to Philly, because he is scheduled for free agency after this season. But I just can't. I would be floored if Dame requests out in the middle of the year in Portland. That doesn't feel like how that situation is going to end.
No, I really think best case scenario happens next offseason. I'm with you on the Pacers, actually. Like, dating back to the very beginning of this, we were trying to figure out a 3-team deal. My co-host and I forget what we settled on, but we came up with something where it was like Portland, Indiana, Philly 3-team deal. And I think it was Ben to Portland, CJ to Indiana, and then Brogdon. It was Brogdon, Lamb, and the 13 pick to Philly, which is obviously off the table now. But like the Indiana thing,
Duarte instead of the 13th pick.
Right. But, I mean, like the Indiana thing.
It doesn't make, as of right now, unless there's a third team involved, I don't understand it at all from Indiana's perspective, because you need to be getting off Sabonis or Turner in a Ben Simmons deal.
And that's what I'm wondering. Because it seems like Turner just doesn't have a ton of trade value around the league.
That's wild to me, by the way.
Me too. Yeah, I don't get it at all. But like conceptually, if I'm talking, which of the two bigs fits better with Simmons, I would say it's Turner.
For sure.
Maybe there's a 3-team deal where Philly sends Simmons to Indiana, Indiana sends Sabonis somewhere else.
I've thought a lot about which team. There are teams that would want Sabonis, but he's so much more of a unique player than Miles Turner. I would say that you need to be prepared to give him some semi-substantive license over your offense if you're going to trade for him.
Right. Yeah. Portland was my idea for them as well, but I don't know if they would have interest in him. Like that's where
and Nurk would be weird.
Yeah, it would be weird. I know. That's the problem. A lot of these teams like have either,
and they would be like collecting Caucasian bigs at that point. There.
Yeah. So I don't know if Indiana's involved. That's the kind of framework I think makes the most sense for them too. Not they send Brogdon back to Philly and send Sabonis elsewhere, and then get something back for Sabonis, or like whichever team gets Sabonis sends stuff to Indiana, stuff to Philly, splits the difference.
Bookended this podcast with some Ben Simmons talk, started it with some Ben Simmons talk. How's that for Sixers discussions right now? Bryan, are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and all the great work that you do?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at B Toporek, Toporek. You can find, I write about the Sixers and just salary cap stuff.
Condolences for that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great summer at Forbes Sports, and do some stuff for the Step Back at Fansided as well. And then you can find my podcast, the NBA Podcast, wherever podcasts are found. And I hear we have some special guests coming up to walk through some League Pass rankings soon. So keep an eye out for that.
Check out that podcast. They went slumming over at the pod, and Adam and I were on there for League Pass rankings. this episode is going up first. So, but regardless
Yes.
of when you're listening to this episode, go head over to the NBA pod. If you're listening to this on Sunday or Monday, don't do that because it won't be up yet.
Right.
But any days after that, go check out. They were a blast. Bryan, as always, thank you for your time. I think you know by now I'll be pestering you again in the future, but thank you so much for this. It was, I think, it was as fun as it could be to talk about the Sixers, right?
Right. That's about the best way to sum that up. But I am happy to do it. And for all of our sakes, I pray he gets traded soon, and I will happily rejoin you when he does.
Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.